All right, good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank RAKMS for giving us this opportunity to test your networks, and we are excited to share our findings and hopefully improve the networks here at RAKMS. So starting off with some introductions, my name is Aiden. I'm sort of the captain of this team, but I specialize in web exploitation. Next up, we have Adam. He is our web expert and took point on the Windows systems. Then we have Dean, who is our Linux expert. Julian, who is very knowledgeable in the relevant compliance standards. Eric, who deals with low-level systems such as ICS and SCADA. And finally, Alanis, who is our cloud and AWS expert. Our agenda for today, we'll be starting off with a quick overview of our findings, followed by some relevant compliance issues we'd like to bring up, the key findings we'd like to bring to your attention, followed by the key recommendations to improve your systems. And finally, we'll finish with some closing remarks and leave time for questions. So I'm going to hand it over to Alanis to go over the overview.
Hi. So over the course of our engagement, we discovered 36 vulnerabilities, 20 of which were new, and also identified 20 regulation violations. Our examination followed the requirements set forth by the TSA Cybersecurity Vulnerability Assessment and the best practices established by the NIST framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. As such, this security assessment, subsequent remediations, and security reassessments partially fulfill the identify, protect, and detect functions of the NIST framework. Throughout our engagement, we employed this risk matrix to record the likelihood and impact of each of our vulnerabilities. You'll see in our report that they are sorted by these identifiers. Also note that as the likelihood and impact of finding increases, so does its severity.
All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit about compliance. So as an airport and an operator of passenger rail, and as you may know, RAKMS is required to comply with TSA regulations and security directives. And a recent security directive that was just reissued this year was issued in October 2023, and that security directive requires airport operators to appoint a cybersecurity coordinator that will report any incidents such as data breaches to the TSA, implement a cybersecurity implementation plan, and conduct a cybersecurity vulnerability assessment using TSA Form 3157, which we partially followed in our methodology. The primary areas in Form 3157 that we found needed potential improvement were access management and access control. And non-compliance with the TSA regulations can result in a fine of almost $15,000 for airport operators. So it's quite important that to comply. And GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation, and it applies to any organization that does business with citizens of the European Union. The cost for non-compliance with GDPR is real, and it's no exaggeration when people say that it's one of the most strict privacy and security laws on the planet. The average GDPR fine in 2023 was 4.4 million euros, or almost $4.5 million. And there were 470 companies fined in 2023. And Team 10 found 7 GDPR violations that could be remedied by RAKMS, primarily in storage of data and security of processing. And the thing about GDPR violations is not only is there a civil penalty associated with it, but there's also since all the organizations that violate the GDPR are made public through public records, there could also be some reputational damage. And we want to avoid that. And this is a breakdown of the compliance. As you can see, the most areas that need improvement is access control.
So how is RAKMS actually doing after the first engagement and patching fixes included? Well, better. We saw that password policy improved. There were no crackable passwords or employee users on the Active Directory domain. We also saw that newer versions of software had been released and put in place for Linux machines. However, the single most severe vulnerability we found, insufficient authentication and trend controls, was not properly remediated. An effort was made, but when there is potential for loss of life, everything must be rock solid. While the Linux hosts hosts admin patched, the Windows and Active Directory domain was not as thoroughly patched. We saw vulnerabilities, one-on-one vulnerabilities such as zero logout and no patch. The AWS infrastructure was also vulnerable. That's 3 points.
All right, so now I'm going to go over the key recommendations that we have for our AKMS. First of all, by implementing a policy to constantly update software and patch your systems, a lot of the vulnerabilities we found would be remediated not only now, but also in the future when new exploits come out. Second of all, we observed a few access control issues, and in 2021, the OWASP Foundation, which is like the Web Foundation, reported broken access controls as the #1 most frequent vulnerability. And also, as mentioned previously, the most critical vulnerability we found was regarding broken access controls. And finally, we mentioned there was improvement in network segmentation, and this was true for 2 of the networks. We were heavily slowed down by the improved network segmentation, but for the remaining 2, there were still flaws that, if fixed, would be able to give your incident response teams a lot more time in the event of a breach.
Now, onto the vulnerability breakdown. We see that, fortunately, there were far fewer criticals than last time, which is really great to see, especially when we have such critical vulnerabilities that can lead to loss of life. There were still quite a few highs and mediums that probably will be important to resolve later, but we're confident that our AKMS can do that. Now, unfortunately, 50% of the vulnerabilities that we found in the initial engagement were not remediated, but something that we were very impressed and happy to see is that 39% of them were fully remediated, along with some others that were partially remediated or new vulnerabilities. And that's something that we believe can really be improved upon in the future.
All right, so to sum everything up, we want to congratulate RAKMS on their social engineering training and the way they implemented it between the initial engagement and our current engagement. Because in the initial engagement, we were able to get access via social engineering, but in this engagement, we were only able to elicit information, which shows that the training program is working. In terms of outdated systems, the majority of the major vulnerabilities that we found were due to outdated software, which is really easy to upgrade, which is good for RAKMS. And in terms of partial remediation between the initial engagement and our current engagement, there was a bunch of steps taken to try and prevent us from exploiting some of the vulnerabilities. However, there are still more remediations that need to be done, because although they slowed us down, we were still able to get into the majority of the systems.
Any questions?
Yes, so thank you very much. It was a really, really solid presentation. Can you go back to the pie chart? So, the next one. Yeah. So, what I'm not clear on is how worried should I be by this? Is the 50% that are not remediated, are there any criticals in there? You know,
So the 2 primary ones that we saw that were not remediated was the broken access control in the train systems, as well as this vulnerability zero logon. Zero logon is a vulnerability that did give us quick access to the network, and that's why we have it as a critical. But really the most important thing, the most important and probably the biggest vulnerability that really has to be taken care of, that is a critical that has been remediated, is that broken access control in the tram systems. We were able to stop the tram systems, start them going, and because that can lead to loss of life, that definitely has to be taken care of, but we're confident that can happen. Otherwise, there's not so much to worry about. We saw some pretty big improvements from previously, but those are the 2 ones to take care of primarily.
Verify we did not actually stop the tram systems.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
We did not stop any train systems.
Yeah.
Right, of course, for safety.
Thank you.
Any questions? Other questions? Okay, well,
Thank you for your time.
yeah, thank you for your time.